Hello and welcome to my video showing you how to get texture in your stone walls using acrylics and other media. This is going to be part of my demo for next week on Artist Demo Days of how to paint a foxglove. The actual stone wall is behind here, so this is just a very small part of next week's exciting video. Okay, so what we're going to do first of all is use all these materials. So I'm going to be using white gesso. That is an acrylic primer that you need on any surface that's not an acrylic paper that's pre-primed. Prussian blue, De La Rowney System 3 acrylic paint. Burnt sienna, and I'm using Amsterdam Expert White Titanium White Heavy Body paint. Heavy body is best for this. I'm also going to be using this wallpaper. If I do that, hopefully you can see the texture on it. A textured wallpaper that has a kind of stone wall effect here. So this is one that I did by using the wall, and we've got the fields and the buttercups and things, but I'm actually just going to show you how to do the wall. It is actually here. If I do this, you can see it with the light shining on it, but I want to show you how to do that first bit with gesso. So I'm going to do it on a dark background so that you can see. So I've prepared that earlier. I'm going to be using 3 brushes today. An old hog brush, inexpensive, nice and bristly, and that's going to be for the gesso. Then I'm using an SAA number 10 flat acrylic brush. And then for the detail, I'm actually using a watercolour, an SAA silver worker brush, a detailer brush, I beg your pardon. I love these brushes, and I've actually started using them for acrylics as well as watercolours, although I keep this separate. This is just used for my acrylics. Okay, so I'm just going to get a nice dollop of gesso on the brush like this, nice and thick look, and get the idea of a bit of a stone wall. I live very close to the Peak District, and we get stone walls both in limestone and gritstone. And they're really rather lovely. The texture is fantastic. So just putting a nice lot of thick paint on there, and then a smaller one here. They're quite haphazard, the stones that they use. It's quite an art form making these walls in the Peak District. So that's going to be a little bit lower, a little bit wider. Now at this point I'm just going to stop here because I don't want this to dry too much before I do the next technique. So I'm going to use this textured wallpaper, and I'm going to imprint in the gesso here. So I'm just going to press this on top of the gesso, and it makes an imprint. Hopefully you can see that there. Yeah, you can see the texture. So I'm going to do that on each of these. I might vary it a bit by turning it upside down or sideways and getting a little bit more of a pattern. So I continue with this and just show you how I'd get another stone here, you know, maybe a little bit of a triangular stone, because this is what the walls are like in the peaks. They're called dry stone walls for those who are not local. They're a little bit more of this. And then again, using the wallpaper, just imprinting there to get some texture on top. Also what I would do is just this nice and bristly marks here for the sky. I would have done that first actually, I've forgotten to show you. But this also gives nice texture for the background. Now this obviously needs washing really well, so I'm just going to leave that in the water there. It's very important to wash brushes, your acrylic as gesso as well, because it is acrylic based. And acrylic always dries completely and rock hard, and so it will ruin your brush or any other materials that you're using. Okay, so as I say, I've got one here that I did earlier, you can see there, but of course you can't see anything in between, so I wanted you to see that first bit done on the dark background. Okay, so now I've got my acrylic paints here, and I'm going to start by mixing the burnt sienna and the Prussian blue. When you mix them together, you get this really nice dark brown or grey, depending on the mixture. So more blue will make you grey, and more brown will make more of a browny colour. And I want it nice and fairly thin like this on the brush, and I'm just going to paint over the top of the wall like this and the sky area. So I'm just putting a lot of this mixture on top because I want it to be dark so that I can then bring out the texture by over painting. Now at the moment it's all just a dark black colour. So if I add a bit more of the burnt sienna, I will get more of a brown look, and if I add more of the Prussian blue, I will get more of a greyish colour coming through. It's quite blue there, so if I just add a little bit more of the burnt sienna, you can see it mixing on the paper. I'm a big fan of doing that. I think it makes your painting much more exciting if you actually mix on the paper. You can add a little bit of water if the paint is drying too quickly. This is actually done on watercolour paper, and this is why the gesso is so important, because it needs to be primed so that the paint doesn't soak into the paper. A little bit more of this. Now ideally you want this to dry if you want certain colours to show up, but whilst it's still wet it has a really nice effect when you add the white. So cover the whole area with a mixture of the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, as I say, mixed in different parts so it makes it more interesting. Now this is where the magic really starts. I'm not actually going to clean the brush, I'm just going to get a little bit of white on here, and you can see how it's mixing. If I add that to the dark mix here, I get grey. You see that? So that's a lovely colour to highlight the texture of the wallpaper imprints that I've got on here on the wall. So what I'm going to do, use the brush, the flat brush, it's important this, fairly thin paint now at this stage, and just brush gently over the texture, and then it starts to appear before your eyes, so it's quite magical. Look at this. So I'm just going very gently across the wall, and you can see the pattern starting to show through. So I'm now going to make it a little bit lighter by adding more white, and it'll start to really show through more. Look at that lovely texture coming through. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of the burnt sienna to the colour, so I get, look at that really nice colour. You can see this texture coming. I use wallpapers quite a lot for imprinting, for printing itself. It's fantastic for printing, and I will be doing some of that on the Foxglove video next week, live on May the 9th at 2 o'clock. You can see me doing that on artist demo days. So you see that texture coming through. It's just an interesting way of doing it. Now I'm going to highlight this again a bit later when it's dried a bit more. But meanwhile I'll clean the brush because I don't want that to dry onto the brush. And I'm going to swap over to my detailer brush here, and I'm going to use acrylic ink this time. So this is sepia acrylic ink. The reason is it's very strong colour and it's already wet. And I'm going to add this into the cracks that I've got here. And I'd left the cracks already when I was adding the wall here. Look, you can see the cracks here, but I've got to try and get them back a little bit where the print has come through. So I'm just painting that in. Now this silver detailer brush really helps me to get that detail. And what I would do, because we often get this sort of out some of these lovely areas here that we've got with the texture of the imprint, because that's what happens with these stones. You can start to see the wall appearing. And what's nice here as well sometimes is to use a little bit of a water spray. So here's a water spray. If I do that, it just helps it to be a little bit looser. And I can just dab that off if there's too much. Ideally, we want all of this to dry before the next stage. I'm going to go back to my flat brush now. And it's important to make sure that this is really dry. I always say to my students, don't just dry the brush, but dry all the way up the handle, because the water sometimes gets here and it'll leak down into the paint, and then you won't have the nice strong paint that you want. So I'm going back to this mixture of burnt sienna and Prussian blue here. I'm just going to add a little bit more now because it's drier. Hopefully that's it. Yes, it's working a little bit more now because it's drier on there. So now I want to get more highlights on the edge, as if the sun is shining from this side. So you really see that texture coming through. And a little bit more. So again, dry the brush really thoroughly all the way up the handle, and this time just pure white on the brush. Again, it's important to make sure this is quite thin, yeah, and then just use it flat across the texture like this, and now it's really highlighting in the corner there, as if the sun is really shining. This is still wet, so it's not working perfectly. So if that happens, just let it dry first before applying the paint. So there we have it, a nice textured wall using acrylic paint and wallpaper, textured wallpaper, gesso of course first imprinting with that wallpaper. As I say, you can use it for all sorts of paintings. This is one I prepared with buttercups and buttercup fields, and you can see the way that the wall has worked quite well there. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please share it. Thank you for watching.